Oh, good evening, everyone. How are we doing this evening?
Great.
Fantastic. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the Westport Library. I must say, feels so good to see all of you back in our wonderful space again. It's been a long time, and we're just happy to have you back, so welcome. And what a fantastic return. Because we're joined tonight by Craig Melvin and his wife, Lindsay Czarniak. Craig is currently the anchor of NBC's Today show and a host of Dateline NBC. Before joining Today, he was a longtime anchor on MSNBC. He has covered a wide variety of breaking news events during his accomplished career, including several national political conventions and the mass shootings in Charleston, South Carolina, as well as Sandy Hook Elementary here in Connecticut. Melvin has also taken part in NBC's sports coverage of numerous major events, including the 2018 Winter Olympics and the 2019 Super Bowl. He graduated from Wolford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where he now serves on the Board of Trustees. His new book, titled Pops, Learning to be a Son and a Father, is a deeply personal exploration of fatherhood, addiction, and resiliency. For Craig, the book is more an investigation than it is a memoir. It's created an opportunity to better understand his father, as well as dig deeper into his family's legacy of addiction and despair. But it's also about transformation and redemption and the exploration into the challenges facing all dads, including Craig himself, who is a father of 2 young children. Pops is the story of all the men who mentored and served as surrogate father figures, and of all the inspiring fathers Craig has reported on during his Dad's Got This series on the Today Show. Pops is also the story of how Craig and his dad, Lawrence Melvin's long journey to reconciliation and understanding, and how all of these experiences and encounters have informed Craig's understanding of his own role as a father. Lindsay Czarniak is a sportscaster and NFL sideline reporter for Fox Sports. She joined Fox Sports in 2008 as the network's NASCAR, doing the NASCAR coverage and covering the NFL. Prior to joining Fox Sports, she spent 6 years as a SportsCenter anchor and field reporter for ESPN's NFL pregame show, NFL Primetime. In January 2015, she became the solo anchor of SportsCenter. As solo anchor, Czarniak hosted ESPN SportsCenter on the Road initiative, anchoring the network's coverage of events like the Super Bowl, NBA Finals, the World Series, and Major League Baseball's All-Star Game. Born in Harrisburg, PA, Czarniak was raised in Northern Virginia in a sports atmosphere, with her father working as a sports reporter and editor for USA Today, so it runs in the family. She played lacrosse and field hockey in high school and graduated from James Madison in 2000 with a major in journalism and a minor in studio art. She's married to Craig, whom she met on the set of WRC TV in Washington, D.C. And now I'm delighted to turn the podium over to these two guys. Thank you for being here.
Wow.
Thank you.
That was such a nice intro. Thank you so much. This reminds me of when we met. It was 2008 in Washington, D.C. And after we started realizing that we might have liked each other, he would try to make me laugh. He would try to make me laugh.
These people didn't sign up for this.
I know, that's true. This is about your book.
I didn't know where you were going with that.
It is a funny story because we did meet on a set.
And by the way, they've got a bunch of folks watching on the live stream, so they've got these. So where should we?
So I should get to it.
No, but where should I look?
I think straight up there. Is that right?
I'm sorry. I'm not used to being on this side of the interview.
So to that point, you know what Melvin does for a living, but one thing he does not like to do is talk about himself, right? So I want to commend you because with this book, he has had to do a heck of a lot of talking about himself for this past week, and I've been so amazingly proud. But I before I get to dig in and ask you questions, which is awesome because I've written notes all over the book. I
Great.
have many
Great.
questions. I wanted to give some context of what my perspective has been of you, because this has been such a process and such a long process. When you first started this, when would you say was the very first? I was thinking about that today. When did you actually start after you knew, okay, we're going to do this?
I think it was right before the pandemic. I think, right? I
Yeah.
feel like it was right. It was February of last year when I started to really sort of really work on it and not just talk about working on it. Yeah.
Because that process has been amazing for me to watch, because it was learning how you did this, working, you know, in writing, but also the interviewing, the hours of interviewing that you had to do with your family members. And I remember thinking, oh, you're going to do that? You're going to call your dad and talk to him for several hours. And to me, it sounded like, wow, this is going to be interesting. And to think where you've gotten to with it,
Yeah.
it's quite amazing.
Thank you. That was, you know, people will occasionally ask, you know, who's your favorite interview? And I've always struggled with the question until I worked on this project. And now that my favorite interview is my father, because I was able to, under the guise of journalism, pepper him with more than 4 hours worth of questions that I otherwise probably would not have had the courage to ask. And he answered all of them. And it was important for me to use his words as much as possible in the book. The only problem is when you ask questions of loved ones and you don't know the answer and you're surprised, sometimes pleasantly, sometimes not so much. You've got to be ready to fire back with a follow-up question. It's one of the basic tenets of journalism. And there were a couple of occasions where Dad would answer a question, and I was so taken aback at his response, I would like fumble through notes and like what, and so I
Like what? Can you give us an example?
their origin story. You know, my parents. I mean, I think most people like to think they know how their parents met and fell in love, and I thought I knew, and come to find out, I did not know. As you know, there's a picture in the book, actually. My mother picked out all the pictures, by the way. She's very proud
She's
of
the
that.
holder of the pictures in the family.
And she sent them off to the publisher she would only send them off if the publisher promised to send them directly back to her. And she wanted to make sure no one else got a copy. But there's a picture in the book of me at my parents' wedding reception. You know, I was born in 1979. I was a pleasant surprise. My parents were married in 1982, so there are a couple years there where I had a different last name. I knew that. I did not know the picture that I've always thought was of my parents' wedding reception was not. And I said to my dad, I think the question was as innocuous as, tell me about the wedding reception. What was that like? There was this pregnant pause. He was like, wedding reception? What wedding reception? I was like, the picture that I've seen for years of me and Mom's cutting the cake in a wedding dress. It's like, that wasn't a wedding reception. Why'd you think that? That was his response. And in that moment, I guess, I was like, well, why did I think that? I never really asked, just assumed. Come to find out, my parents had been dating for a while, and my mother had essentially given him an ultimatum, which led to their union at the courthouse. And my mother insisted on having a party to celebrate the wedding. As she should, yes. My dad didn't want to go. His cousin convinced him to go. And he showed up, and he was there for 30, 45 minutes. It was a source of contention for a number of years. And the party wasn't even after the ceremony at the courthouse. It was weeks later, and I had never known that. And so that led to a larger conversation about their marriage and about marriage in general. So yeah, it was, you know, I said to you a couple of times, I found it to be the most cathartic thing I've ever done, professionally or personally. It was probably cheaper than therapy during the pandemic. But in journalism school, they teach you especially for live interviews, you don't go asking questions typically unless you know the answer. That's just, and for this project, I wasn't able to do that. I ended up asking a lot of questions that I didn't know the answer to.
I think the vulnerability is something that's been talked about, but that's really at the core, like that's something that strikes me, the vulnerability of you to share the story, of you to ask them for the blessing to talk about this, but also the openness and vulnerability of the family members. And from my perspective as the daughter-in-law, seeing them open up like that, it's like, wow, that story you're talking about with your mom and dad in the wedding reception is like, he said that he consented to the marriage because he could not bear the thought of another man raising his son.
That's right. Yes.
And when I read those words, and that doesn't give too much away, but I just was like, well, damn, because that also took me to a moment, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this. Stop me if you do.
Well, I think it's probably too late, but go ahead.
Our son,
is it in the book? Because I want to make sure it's something that's in the book. Go ahead.
It gives context. Well, at our birthdays with kids, and at our son's first birthday, after that first birthday, they were all there. And I remember your father had a lot to drink. And after that celebration, he felt very emotional and got up and was thanking everyone in the room, right? Showing his love. And that, to me, another thing that sticks out in the book is the fact that he's always wanted, it's like he's wanted to get to the point where he's gotten to now, right? He's always had that inside of him. It's just he's fought this demon for so long. And to me, resiliency is another thing, because you guys not only were successful in this attempt at getting him help, but you had tried before and it didn't work. So I was thinking that would be really interesting for people to hear where that started. Does that make sense? Are you mad at me for sharing?
No, gosh, no. I mean, no. I will tell you, having done this a few times, being interviewed by your wife in front of a live studio audience.
Sorry.
This is it's one of those things where a couple months ago I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And now I'm like, no, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Okay.
I'm joking. No, we tried, long before I knew you. We first tried an intervention with my dad back in the mid-90s. And we would try, off and on every, 5 or 6 years or so, there would be some sort of episode that triggered, a family meeting where we were like, all right, we got to do something. We got to step, and we did that, at least, 3-4 times over the span of 15 years. And it wasn't until 2018, and my father had retired, almost 40 years at the post office, third shift as a mail clerk. You work that shift, you don't develop lasting friendships. You don't develop lots of interests or hobbies. You're working at night, so you're sleeping during the day. And so when he retired, his hobby of drinking became more than a hobby. And so he was drinking every day to the point where he was, blacking out. There would be days where he would be hazy. And we were concerned, but we had just he wasn't really hurting anyone else. And we had sort of resigned ourselves collectively to the fact that this is who he was going to be. And then in 2018, I write about it in the book, this was essentially the impetus for the intervention that stuck. He's out driving, picking up some fast food one afternoon, and he gets in a fender bender. He hits a woman. Fortunately, it didn't hurt the woman. It was a minor accident, but it freaked us all out. Because the concern then became, well, could dad go out, drink too much, and hit and kill someone, a child? Or, and that was something that we wouldn't be able to live with that. So we rallied the troops one more time. This time, what we did, and I wish that we had done it years before, we went to a professional. An assistant of mine from some years ago, her stepfather, who actually happens to live here in Westport, her stepfather ran an organization called Shatterproof. And my assistant had become familiar, Julie, had become familiar with my struggles with my dad. And Julie was like, well, do you mind if I tell my dad? That was my stepdad. I was like, sure, man, whatever. And he reaches out, we have lunch, and he introduces me to another guy who was well-versed in this space. And next thing I know, I'm on the phone with an expert in counseling and addiction. And I had a conversation with her. She's down in South Carolina, and ended up flying down there. And she had a big therapy session with the family. And she coached us on how this was going to go. I mean, it was essentially, it was a well-produced intervention. And before, basically what we had done is we would get my dad, sit him down, he was half sober, and we would scold him. And we're like, you gotta get your life together, and we love you, and you gotta do better than this. And that was the extent of the intervention. Well, naturally, that's not gonna work. But this time, she had us write letters, read the letters. She kept them very short. We kept them very short. And we went around and we read our letters. And at the end, my dad's nephew, my cousin, was going to drive him to this facility. As soon as we finished saying our piece, it could not last more than 30 minutes. And so that Sunday morning, we executed her well-crafted plan, and damned if it didn't work. He, at the end of it, he says, not to give away too much, but he decided that he was at a place where he needed some help. You know, he's crying, we're crying, it's all emotional, gets in the car, goes to Statesboro. I call the next day to check in on him there at Willingway. And lo and behold, it had worked because my dad was blackout drunk. He had little to no memory of the intervention itself. And he finds himself awake in this facility, confused, disoriented, and they call it the sober tank there at Willingway. And the doc said, we got him, well, he'll be just fine, just give us a few weeks. And at this particular place, I mean, there's no cell phones, there's no communicating with him directly. You can communicate through the counselors, through the therapists, and we would get an update every other day. And they would update us on his progress, and they insisted that he was doing better every day. And we just had to trust and believe him.
What were you most nervous about setting out to write this book?
I keep forgetting that you are also a journalist and that your questions are pointed, and that there's, I should have written out some questions for you. I would have gone easier on myself. You know this, I'm not a public person. I don't like to talk about, I tend to think that generally as a society, we overshare. Like everyone shares everything. It's just, it's too much sharing. And I didn't want to share too much. I didn't want to air my family's dirty laundry. I didn't want to make myself vulnerable to strangers. Not you guys, because you bought the book. So, you know, you're not strangers, we're friends. I was anxious about how people in the book would respond. I was anxious about all of it. I was very worried about it. And I got to a point where I would have conversations with Dad, and we talked about this for at least a year, about how remarkable his story was and how powerful the idea of a man in his late 60s deciding to pick himself up, clean himself off, and decide he wanted to essentially live anew. And we kind of decided there was value in that story. The value being, there are so many people in this country who either struggle mightily with addiction, or they have a loved one who struggles mightily with addiction. Families where there's an estranged son or daughter or brother or sister or loved one, and their estrangement is somehow connected to that addiction. And once I got my head around that, and the publisher approached about writing this sort of celebration of fatherhood, and I didn't think anyone wanted to read a book about like other dads who are doing something extraordinary in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But when the publisher approached and I had these conversations with Dad, it seemed like it was part of God's plan. And so, you know, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a firm believer in therapy too. And I've had conversations over the years with various therapists who talk about unburdening and the need to unburden oneself. And I think as I was working on this thing, I think one of the reasons I found it so cathartic is I realized during the process of the writing, I was unburdening myself. I had kept so much of that stuff here. And then I realized as I was interviewing my dad that during the process of the writing, he was unburdening himself. As cathartic as I found the process, my father, as you know, I think he probably found it even more cathartic.
Yeah, I think he's been great. So now, yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk to him now because I think he's extremely grateful, but you've released a certain piece now for him, too, because he knows in a way it's forgiveness.
No, I was just going to say that. I mean, part of the motivation was to write this love letter to my dad, who, and he's talked about this. When you get to a point in your life, apparently, where you realize you got more days behind you than you do ahead of you. And he's at that point in his life. And I wanted to make sure that he knew how much I loved him, how remarkable I thought his journey was, how thankful we all were that he had decided to change his life and become this inspiration to our family and now to strangers. It's I write about it in the book. One of the things that I discovered later in life, I'm not that old yet, but is kids are hard on their parents for a variety of reasons. And I was hard on my dad because, he was absent physically oftentimes because of work and the drinking. And then when he was home, he was sleeping. And then he wasn't around. And I was resentful. I was angry for much of my teenage years and then in my 20s as well, even into my 30s. And I was angry because I didn't understand why. As journalists, we really get hung up on the what and the how, but it's always the why that we really want. And I never got the why. And then until all of a sudden, as I get older and I started learning more about addiction and learning more about the root causes of that addiction and how addiction affects others and how it manifests itself in myriad ways. Then I came to understand that he couldn't help it. It was a sickness, it was a disease, and it permeated every aspect of his life and consequently our lives. And I don't quote Oprah a lot, but I believe it was Oprah a number of years ago who said, when we know better, we do better. And now we know better, so we do better. But 20 years ago, when my dad was at the height of his problems, the depths of his despair, I was angry a lot. And so I wanted him to know that all of that was forgiven. And so it's a love letter to him. It's an attempt to give him his roses, his flowers while he's still above ground. Yeah, full stop.
When you talk about those years when it was in the depths of despair, what did you expect the relationship would be like with your dad moving forward?
I thought we would always be estranged. I mean, I thought there would be periods I thought he would always show up for the big stuff like he did when we were younger, graduations, weddings, funerals. I thought that as we got older, he would still be there for the big stuff, but he would continue his reclusiveness and he would stay separated from the family. He would be estranged until he drank himself to death, just like his father did. That's what I thought. And I'm happy I'm so wrong. I mean, now the guy will FaceTime in the middle of the afternoon. I'm like, dude, I'm working. It's 2:30 and he wants to, check on the kids. But the kids are at school. We can call you back. But he's become, they were up 2 weeks ago and there we are on the sidelines of the soccer game. And our son, Dell, has not scored a goal all season. Not for lack of trying. He's more of a defender. But there, when you know it, me and Pop, as he calls my dad, standing on the sidelines, 30 seconds into the game, dribble, shoot, score. First goal of the season for granddad. And, Dad, we're high-fiving and celebrating. And it was just, and in that moment I realized that he's he's got a fresh start. He's got a fresh start. We've got a fresh start. His 6 grandchildren are coming to know a man who did not exist when we were their ages. It's a story of redemption, you know, regardless of age. Like it's so, you know, it was part of what I struggled with as I was working on the book. I didn't know about the relationship that my father had with his father, my grandfather. And I asked him during the course of our 4-hour plus interview, we did it in three different sessions. And I said, Pops, what's the most money you ever wasted? I mean, as journalists, you have like a list of questions that you can always go to that are supposed to like elicit pretty good answers. And you'd be surprised what you find out about people if you ask them, what's the most money you ever wasted? So I asked my dad this question, which I've asked before of others, and without missing a beat, he said, I'll tell you, about $1,500 in 1986. It's like $1,500 in 1986. I'm giving away the whole book, but that's all right. He's like, I said, what'd you spend the money on? I said, that's how much it cost to put my daddy in the ground. I buried him in 86. It cost $1,500. I never got a cent of that back. I said, wow. And in that moment, I realized that for most of my life, I had been expecting my father to be something that he had never seen. And if you think about it, each generation does a little bit better with parenting than the previous generation. My dad didn't even know who his dad was until he was almost a teenager. And he was born in prison. Kids would pick at him about it. And he didn't have a father figure in his life. All of a sudden, the happy accident comes along in 1979. And
That's Melvin.
Thank you for
We'll just say.
Yes. I think we all expected that somehow like that, he would be a great dad. And we expect that of other dads as well. And the reality is he was exponentially better than his father was. He didn't leave the family. He worked every day for almost 40 years, a work ethic that I write about at some length in the book. So I didn't understand until later, much later in life, and especially when I sat down to write this thing, that my dad, by his generation standards, actually was okay. So, you know, it's by the way hard talking to you about this because you know all of these stories, and I love how you're pretending that you don't.
I'm not. I'm saying.
I know. I'm like.
No, I have a lot of thoughts just because for me reading this, there are things that I read.
You actually read the book?
I did. I read the whole thing, even the end.
Did you hear the ebook? Did you listen to the ebook?
I haven't heard it yet, but I can't wait. I think that's amazing because your voice is like butter. I love that. Seriously.
What was your question?
So anyway, me reading it, it's like there is a lot of, I get the flip side of the story. Example, the story about when we met on set, and that's a very tiny thing. I didn't really know your side of it. Like I didn't know what the backstory and like what you were thinking when you first met me, that you described me actually as coolly.
So you're going to use this portion. You're going to use this portion of the.
No, I'm not. I'm kidding.
Okay.
But I wanted to point out. I'm not going to read much, but the first line to what you're talking about. I mean, the fact that your book and the intro starts with "My father was born in 1950 in a federal prison in West Virginia," and I know that's one of the things you guys talked about on the Today Show when you were talking about it. What did he say about that? Obviously, he doesn't remember, but what did he,
No, I mean, it's...
and whose idea was it to start with that sentence? Because, wow.
Well, I'll tell you whose idea it was, a guy named Andy Lack. Because like some years ago, Andy Lack used to be the chairman of the news division at NBC. He was, he's my boss's boss's boss. Like he ran the whole kit and caboodle. And I was in his office. I don't remember what I was doing in there, but I was in his office and we were sort of shooting the breeze, and I think he asked me about my dad, and he asked me. We were talking about our families, and he said, "Well, what's your dad's story?" I said, "Well, it's a little murky. I mean, I've never really asked him about it. There's some whispers that that he might have been born in jail or we don't really know. I mean, he's somewhere in West Virginia. I've never really, and he said something like, you call yourself a journalist? You don't even know where your father is, something snarky. That's just what he was. They said, if that's true, if your father was born in prison and you ever decide to write a book, that's how you start your book. You got to grab him by the collar. So anyway, as I was doing the research and found out that, yes, Dad was in fact born, not just in any prison in West Virginia, by the way. Fun fact, as Westporters, you'll appreciate this. Martha Stewart served her time in the same federal facility in West Virginia. Billie Holiday back in the 40s.
Have you talked to Martha about that?
It's funny you should ask me that. The editor of the book, when the researcher discovered that, he said, well, Craig, I know Martha's on the Today Show all the time, and you've done some segments with her. You guys seem quite friendly. And Martha's a delightful woman. But if I had asked Martha Stewart to talk about her time in the federal prison in West Virginia, she would have stabbed me. There's no question.
Hey, we have something in common.
She would have shanked me. So no, I did not. And actually, the Martha Stewart portion, it's in there, but it's a long story. Anyway, Billie Holiday, Martha Stewart, Machine Gun Kelly. Again, back then, it was a progressive prison for women. Like they sent women to this prison because they really, whatever they were doing back then, it seemed to be working for women. And my grandmother,
she was running moonshine.
She was a bootlegger, and she also ran numbers too. Don't short sell her. But so she ran liquor and numbers out of her house. And so that's my dad grew up seeing that. Like, so you grew up like that. It shapes and molds you in different ways. So it wasn't just being born in the prison that startled me. It was the fact, and every family has secrets. Most families, dark secrets, things that are never discussed, never spoken of, certainly never asked about. And in our family, that was just something that was understood and they didn't talk about. And I pressed him a number of times. And in the book, I asked him 7 or 8 different ways until finally he just said, listen, we just didn't talk about it. But because for me, if I had known in the 90s that my grandma had served hard time, I mean, I would have been shouting from the rooftops. That's a great story. They didn't see it that way. When I came along, my grandma, Serena Smith, she was either in church, going to church, or coming from church. Like she just knew the Lord. And so this picture that I had of her for 40 years, it wasn't shattered, it was enhanced. And I think that my dad's worry, it was that I was going to view my grandmother in a different light. So yeah, no, the prison thing was, I couldn't get enough of it. In fact, I called a couple other family members to try and get a little bit more context. And there was no interest in talking about grandma's stint in prison.
Did they know about it?
Oh yeah, they all knew. They didn't talk about it. Uncle James knew. They all knew, but they never. And I will be honest with you. I am not convinced that even for the book, was given the entirety of the story. Because I said this to my dad and I said this to my uncle. I'm not familiar with, the federal penal code of the 1940s, but on your first offense, they don't typically send you to a federal institution in West Virginia. Not on your first offense.
You think like she might have?
I think it was a way of life. But my dad's take on it, and I happen to agree, my grandmother was a single mom. She had, at that point, she had 5 kids, no man around. She didn't go to college. She finished the 6th grade. She was an entrepreneur. She was making money the only way she knew how. She had to make ends meet, and she did that. And we can judge her now through the lens of 2021 and our moral code. But she had hungry kids who had to go to school and needed clothes. So she sold liquor and ran a gambling ring, practically. And then later she started to clean up her life, and she found the Lord, and then she started cleaning people's houses, and then later started to work at a dry cleaners. And by the time, like I said, I came along, she was retired. I think we're supposed to take questions from the audience
I
at
wish
some
I would
point.
have met her. Okay, almost done. And then we'll do that. The women, when you talk about your grandma, and also what your dad, who shaped and molded your dad, it is incredible to me because ever since I've been a part of your family, it's obvious that you were raised by great men that were father figures for you, but the women and your mom specifically, Betty Jo Melvin, she is a force in a great way. I mean, I remember hearing stories about her before I met her, just like, wait till you meet Betty Jo.
Those weren't stories as much as they were warning. Just giving you a heads up.
So the first time I meet her, she's on your stove in your DC condo making collard greens. Remember that?
Oh, that's right.
And I came in and I was nervous as heck. And she was awesome and so sweet. But it just became very clear. And what I love that you talk about so much in this too is how she sacrificed, but how she did things also because of race and because of things that were happening there to put you in the best position to make sure that you and your brother Ryan and Lawrence had the best, I guess, chances possible, you would say. What was it like to go to her asking for honesty for this? And what was something that you were scared to ask her about?
If there was anyone who deserved a tribute book, it wouldn't be my father, it'd be my mother. So it was, I was uncomfortable about approaching her with this
like
idea initially. Feeling like she would.
A little left out or.
Exactly, you know her. And I write about it in the book as well, because the title of the book could have easily been Pops and Betty Jo, because my mother for the bulk of my life played the role of mother and father. I did not want this to be seen as a slight to her. And we had a very candid conversation before I started, and she made it known that it would not be seen as that. She also made it known that my facts or my father's facts weren't necessarily her facts. And after I wrote the book, it was important that both of my parents sign off on it. And my dad, he reads it and no changes. He was pleasantly surprised and humbled and just, he was pleased. I'll just leave it at that. I made it known. My mother, I considered her a copy of the thing, and I didn't hear from her. You don't know my mother, but it's a little unusual for her not to respond to anything, much less a book about her husband. Finally, I called her. I said, "Well, Mom, have you had a chance to read it?" Yeah, I read it. I read your book. Well, what'd you think? Well, if that's how you and your daddy remember everything, then I guess that's how y'all remember it. I said, "Well, no, Ma, that seems a little passive aggressive." And that was, and again, as some of your mothers can occasionally be passive aggressive.
No, I take offense to that because not all moms are that way.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah, hit dog will holler. And she finally admitted that there were parts of the book that she didn't remember the same way as my father remembered them. And so I went back to her, and I wanted to fact check, and there were a couple things that they both remembered differently, as husbands and wives occasionally do. And I asked her I made the mistake of saying, "Well, if there are things in the book that you really feel strongly about, I'll adjust them." Well, she starts to send texts of notes that she's made about the book, because I guess she took what I said to her as editorial control. And I finally had to call her again and say, no, the book is called Pops. I'll take your notes and we'll make some adjustments around the edges. But if I ever write another book like this, it'll probably be called Betty Jo. But I won't do this again. So you don't have to worry about
Would you
that.
stop?
Never. I'll do a children's book maybe, but this is, no.
That's so funny and it's so entertaining. And I lost my train of thought there for a second. 'cause
That's
I had a
when you
really
could
good
turn to the
question.
audience for questions.
Right, okay. All
If they
right.
have any, I don't know. if
All right,
people-
well, okay.
they're supposed, was I supposed to tell the folks on the interwebs that they could ask questions too? Oh, okay.
Very
Oh,
good.
you get, this is, by the way, the library, this renovation, they haven't paid me to say this. This is, it almost makes the property taxes in this town worth it. It's really,
It is
it's
amazing.
really remarkable what you guys have done here. I don't know what the
Before,
direct-
but we are gonna move on before, what has been the one thing that has meant the most to you after you released it? Is there someone that reached out? Is it one moment?
I have, and again, if you recall from the beginning, I said, my hope, my goal, my sincere prayer was that the book do some good, that it'd help families heal or reconcile, or try once again to save that addict that they love. I have heard from, I mean, the book came out Tuesday. I've heard from, via email, social media, a couple hundred people, literally, who have said that, and they've started reading the book. I don't think most people have finished it, but they've talked about how this has helped them. And so that was all the affirmation that I needed. I think the publisher wants to sell copies of it. But I wrote the book to help people, and it seems to be helping people. I wrote the book selfishly for our kids, for our kids' kids. I think it's important for families to know grandma and grandpa, warts and all. I don't think anyone's well served by romanticizing the past. And so I did it for that, but hearing from people that are reading it, have read it, are listening to it, who have said, thank you. That's meant the most. I gotta be honest with you, it's also special that my wife read it. I didn't, I mean, I don't take for granted that you read the book.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You're actually a good writer.
you lie.
I knew that, but I was like, wow. And I do like the part about the thing I thought I was like, ooh, this is catchy with role models, mentors, and the ghost.
My dad's
when I
nickname.
looked in the beginning, I was like, who's the ghost? What's the ghost? And then
People
the
will have to
story,
read to find out more
right.
about the ghost.
I mean, there are a couple controversial stories.
Yeah,
I
don't want to give away everything.
I won't.
Thank you. But yes, there.
Yeah.
As
and
my boss called a couple of days ago, the president of NBC News, and he said, Craig, I just finished the book yesterday. I said, wow, I thought I knew you. I knew nothing about you.
Right.
And I said, well, no, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He said, no, it's a great thing. He said, all this time, I thought you were boring.
Seriously?
Yeah, I think he was joking, maybe not.
I know he's joking. It is interesting though that you have done something like you've opened this up and it's like peeling off the layers. Exactly what you said. Families don't often show warts and all and talk about that and be
Sure.
vulnerable. And especially during this time now when I believe, and I know a lot of you do too, how important connection is, right? And slowing down, but connection and taking the time. That's really special. Last night, I'll just share because I think it's really cool. And I know you're not going to bring it up. We did a family Zoom because one of Melvin's aunts really just wanted to congratulate you. And they wanted you to be there in person and that couldn't happen. And they said, well, so let's get everyone, all the family together. So there was a Zoom and they got everyone in the family who's down there in South Carolina in the same house. And they toasted Melvin. And it was so cool to see everyone go around. And then you said something really sweet about your mom, but seeing their realization that collectively the help that they could do was really, really powerful.
No, they Zoomed to toast me, and I said last night, this isn't, the book isn't about me. It's about a celebration of my dad and other dads like him who climb mountains, and my dad climbed a hell of a mountain, and it's he's thankful that we helped, and we're thankful that he let us help and start this new chapter. But, it took a village and it took 30 years. And so there's a story of perseverance in there and resiliency.
Yeah, and I do think it's a story also that encourages families to just ask and talk, just about even happy things, just finding out the history, to your point. You're getting really uncomfortable. I can tell the way you're like squirming. Okay.
I was uncomfortable 45 minutes ago.
Well, you were like,
no, I
you
just
switched your legs a million
I
times.
know,
You're
I'm
playing with
terrible
your-
at it.
your
I'm
thing.
terrible at being on the other side. I know it, and I hope I didn't ramble on too much.
Did we go way too long?
I don't think so. Did we go too long? I tend
Look
to do
at that, 48.
That's
They
pretty.
said go
Well, I think
45.
they wanted you to leave 15 minutes for questions, and you're only leaving 12 minutes for questions.
It's okay. It's really okay.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I would just like to say that if anyone in the audience has a question, we have 2 microphones on each side of, one on each side of the forum. Please
agree.
keep your mask on and do not touch the microphone, but we welcome questions from the audience. And while we're waiting for those people, Natalie has written in.
Okay. Hi, Natalie.
She is here as a daughter of an alcoholic mother and so relating. Celebrating Father's Day weekend with your book, as I lost my father figure in January, who stood in for my inattentive biological father. Your story resonates as you both have been part of my DC News family from here in Southern Maryland for a long time. Just giving thanks for you for sharing, and will pass on to my amazing husband as a symbol of gratefulness for the father he is to our children and grandchildren.
Oh, Natalie.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay, so now we'll get to the first question. Do your children know about the book and what do they think?
Well, our kids are 7 and 4, so they know that Daddy wrote a book. They're not old enough to read the book, but they will. And that was one of the reasons that I wrote it. And
Our son knows it's 200 pages.
yes, that's right. He did.
Very proud.
He was, yes, he did notice that it was about 200 pages. He looked at the pictures,
Yeah.
but no, they haven't read it, but they do know. And here's the thing about kids, and our kids especially, they don't care that sometimes we do cool stuff. I think they're so. I was doing this. Before I came over, I was doing this IG live with my friend Maria Shriver, delightful. And Dell comes bebopping in from Facebook, and we're doing like a Q&A, like not Facebook, from a flag football price. We're doing like a Q&A like this, but virtually. He bounces down the stairs, turns the lights on like the home studio, and sits in the chair like he's getting ready to anchor the news. And we've got this home studio in the basement. And I'm over in the corner doing the IG thing. I said, son, I'm doing a virtual book tour. What are you talking about, Dad? I was like, I'm on with people are on, And I'm like Maria, and I turn Maria around to see Dell. Dell comes over. He's like, hey guys. So they probably know I wrote a book. They could care less, unless it's one of those who would win books.
Right.
He's
Who would
obsessed with the
win
who would win books.
The alligator.
Like shark
or
versus
the
alligator.
Shark.
I'm sorry, this is
Tarantula
going off
or-
the rails. Should I take a live studio?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Vitus, and my wife Katie and I are residents of the town and big fans of today's show and Craig's Butter Voice and Lindsay Sports Second, I guess, after the news. But really just wanted to ask you a sort of twofold question. What do you think worked for your father in 2018 versus 20 years ago? Did he hear something different? Was it how you asked? Was he ready to accept help? So that's the first part of the question. And now maybe you talk about it in the book, but does he talk about what the last 3 years was like now that he's been sober and sort of present in your and your children's lives? Does he reflect on that clarity at all?
Yeah, I'll answer your second question first. The short answer is yes. He reflects on it frequently. And every time I talk to him now, he always ends with, I love you. And every third conversation he manages to work in, I'm proud of you. And those weren't things that I heard for probably the first, 30 years of my life, save a graduation or a major event. My father wasn't, those aren't words that he used. In the last 3 years, he's done a lot of that. which is so funny to me and my younger brother, because we're just like, who is this guy? But and the first part of your question, I think what was different in 2018, my dad was at a point where he finally realized that he couldn't battle his demons on his own. And I think there were times in his life where he had tried. He really had. Like he would go, 2 weeks without a drink, which is probably the most. But there are a couple times where he tried. And I think when he got in that car accident and he couldn't remember the accident, I think that helped scare him to the point where he was more open to it. But I also believe, in addition to the professional therapists and counselor that we brought in to sort of lead this intervention, when my dad went to in-person residential rehab, he had to go to AA every day. He had to do group sessions every day. He did individual sessions every day. I remember when I went down to Statesboro to see him the first time, we were having breakfast and it was very emotional just because I could tell like that he was a different person. And I get there and my dad's very gregarious and I could tell that he had been talking about his son to his new friends and he's introducing me to all his new rehab buddies and they kind of left us alone at this breakfast table by ourselves. And I think I said something like, "Pops, it seems like you know everybody in here. You're like the mayor of this place." Yeah, I'm kind of one of the old guys. And I guess they kind of look up to me. He said, "Man, let me tell you, I knew I was drinking too much. I knew I was bad off. You spend a couple weeks in this place, you realize, ooh, I'm not so bad after all." And he proceeded to go on for 2 or 3 minutes talking about how rehab had really helped him develop an appreciation for a lot of things. But one of the things he learned was, he was at the bottom. He wasn't rock bottom. And so he proceeded to go tell me about all of these other people in rehab that were far worse off than him. So he's got a dark sense of humor.
Does he go to therapy or?
He did. And it's funny you should ask me that. He when he got out, part of the program was 90 AA meetings in 90 days. And he did 90, and he actually went longer than that. And then he stopped. And I remember when my mother called to tell me that Dad wasn't going to a meeting that day. We were freaking out. My brother and I, we got on the phone, we thought, you remember, we were like, oh, he's drinking again. He's not going because he's drinking and blah, blah, blah. And got him on the phone. And he said, no, I'm not gonna drink anymore. I'll go to a meeting when I need it. And he's gone. I know he's gone a handful of times since, but no, he doesn't go every day.
Thank you. I don't want to steal up all the time. But
no, that's all right. You pulled a classic journalist move there. It's like, I got a question, then he asked 3. That was good. I like your style, sir. I like your style. Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, how are you all doing?
I'm great.
It's great to see you all away from the screen. I've been watching Today for sure since you joined in 2018. So happy almost 3 years at least.
Thank you.
In the morning. And then Lindsay, I enjoy seeing your sport puns with the kids.
Thank you.
They always make me laugh.
Thank you.
So I first want to send my condolences. I know you are mourning. I would still imagine the loss of your brother. So my question comes from thinking of Lawrence, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. That's how much I enjoy watching the Today Show. But with you saying that your dad wasn't as present as you would have liked when you were younger, what type of help was Lawrence for you when you were growing up, since you're the youngest, I believe? And also, how is your dad taking that with what happened with Lawrence? And also, thank you for the work that you're doing in bringing light to colon cancer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for waking up with us every morning too. It's early. I appreciate you waking up so early. She asked about my older brother who passed away in December from colorectal cancer. And I read about him in that journey in chapter 6. And it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was important for me to people who were in the book. I wanted them to at least be able to read the book to make sure, not again for editorial control, but to make sure that my recollection was accurate, that the names and dates were all accurate. It became apparent, the book had to be finished in December, and it became apparent in November that Lawrence wasn't going to make it. But I wanted him to hear the part of the book that that was about him and his journey and our journey together. So I went into his bedroom, and at that point, he'd signed the DNR, and he was on oxygen, but he couldn't really communicate very well. And so I sat there, and I read the book aloud to him. And you can imagine how difficult that was. And I get to the end of the book, and his wife left me in there by myself, and his eyes were open. So I knew he was awake, and occasionally he would nod, and I would start blubbering, and he would say, "Oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay." And I'd start reading again, and I get to the end, and I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Man, you remember a lot." I say, "Well, thank you, I think, but is it all there?" And he said, "Yeah, it's there." And that was all I needed in that moment, because and I write about it in the book, so I won't talk about it too much right now. But his was a hard life, and so much of what happened to him was terribly unfair. But my father, excuse me, my dad he has this thing. I've dubbed it the ministry of presence, and he'll go and he'll just sit. He'll sit with someone who's sick and dying. He did it with our niece. He did it with his son. He did it with his mother. It's kind of his thing. He doesn't fill the silence. He's not yapping, not asking a bunch of questions. He's just there. He's just there. And you take great comfort in that. We take great comfort in that. And with my brother, he was just there for hours, sitting there. I think I answered your question. I don't know.
You know what's interesting about that, though? James, his brother, is very much like that too. Like, he sort of made it a profession in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's
I would agree.
interesting.
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you so
I
much.
tend to do this thing sometimes, Jennifer, where I think it's a function of being on the other side of the camera. You're not used to answering questions. I either over answer a question or I don't answer it at all. So,
I don't think that's a problem today.
okay.
So we have one more in the audience.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks for writing the book. I flipped through it, and there are just so many stories that you tell that are my story. The story about the car, when my dad stopped driving, that was a big sign. My older brother lived with my grandparents.
Wow.
So, and I lost him as well, very young age. But my question, who were your role models? Like in grade school, high school, were there men that you had in your life that you looked up to?
Yeah, no, I had lots of surrogate dads. I was blessed with that. And a lot of them weren't men. They were women who just sort of stepped in and filled that void. My Uncle James, from an early age, sort of became this father figure to me. I had two other uncles, my Uncle Frank, we call him Uncle Pop, and Uncle Jake. I mean, they were always around. And we were also, they were men of faith. And we spent a lot of time growing up in church. I grew up in South Carolina, Black Baptist church. You live in church when you grow up that way. And so a lot of time was spent with one of the three of them in or around church activities. And as I got older, teachers and coaches who come to find out years later when I would talk to some of them, they were acutely aware that my father was absent. And they saw something in me that I didn't probably see in myself at the time, and went out of their way to fill those voids. And then I've had professional mentors, a guy named Jim Vance, who is a longtime anchor in Washington, D.C., and a guy I work with down in Columbia, South Carolina, a guy named Steve Crocker, who I wrote about in the book. And they've all been at different points in my life, and they've satisfied different needs, some of which I didn't even know I had. You don't fully appreciate this idea that little boys learn how to become men, by and large, by watching their dad. And when you don't have that, you fill those voids and those gaps sometimes with the wrong people. And my mom went out of her way to make sure that the influence in my life were positive. She knew all of my friends. She knew all of their parents. I did not have a long leash when I was in middle school and high school. And it's even by standards back then, like she was hardcore. And that added to the resentment and the anger. But looking back on it now, she knew what she was doing. Yeah, I over-answered that question as per the usual.
Great. We have time for one more.
Thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure this took a lot of courage and love to do what you did.
Thank you.
The question I have is, given your experience with your father, how has that informed your approach to being a parent?
That's a good question. You know, I try to be at as many events as I can with my kids. You know, whether it's, I missed flag football today because I was doing the IG thing, but I was there for flag football last week. But soccer, gymnastics, dance. We had a great gymnastics recital on Sunday with our 4-year-old. Although she's been going all year, and then she's on is it the balance beam? And she's like, she's doing the.
Great.
She was great. I'm not trashing her.
What are you saying?
Well,
She had a little hiccup.
Well, she fell off. And
Yeah,
I'm,
she fell. She
at the recital, I'm like, I said to Lindsay, I was like, she's been doing this for a year. We've been paying for lessons. She goes every week. And it's like showtime, and there are 3 hops, and she flips over. I digress. I try to be there physically because that was something that mattered to me. That was something that I didn't get. My kids could look up in the stands and see, you know, their mom and their dad at Little League. And so I try to do as much of that as possible. A colleague of mine who's become a good friend, Carson Daly. A couple years ago, we were doing one of these Father's Day shoots, and his dad died when he was 5 or 6. His stepdad reared him. Stepdad worked a lot, but he said his stepdad really made sure that they had great memories. And Lindsay does a better job of organizing events and activities that create lasting memories. We try to make memories. We go on great trips. And so that's the kind of dad that I'm trying to be. But I also, you know, I want to be the kind of dad, and I did this when you got home today. Dell was up in our room helping me pick out the shirt. But I hadn't seen him all day, and I just wanted to spend some time with him. And so I asked him to come upstairs and help me pick out the shirt so we could just talk. I just, you know, I want to have the kind of relationship with both of my children where, you know, 15 years from now, after the teenage years where they stop talking to you, apparently, they come back around and they want to talk to us and hang out with us because we're cool people, I think. That's where you.
I would say you. Yep.
Well, I was saying both of us.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Through my lens.
Yeah. Sorry, Jennifer. We ran long.
No, not at all.
Are the folks
Not
on the
at all.
live stream okay? Did we?
I believe that everybody on live stream is fabulous.
Okay.
The audience here is having a good time. I want to thank both of you
Well, thank
for
you.
the
Thank you,
evening.
Jennifer.
And a special thanks, to my beautiful wife, Lindsay, who didn't. Oh, thank you for going easy on me. That wasn't.
So you're saying they were
You people have no
suffering.
idea how much I was dreading this. Like I was not this, but you know, as having you ask
What
questions.
didn't I ask that I should have asked?
You asked everything. No, you asked more than enough.
Okay, I feel like I need to jump in.
Please do, Jennifer. Please do.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming today. Thanks to Craig and Lindsay for sharing your story so much.
And thanks to the Westport Library for having me.
Yeah.
Absolutely, anytime. So I just want to thank you all, and there are books available if you're in the building, and if you're outside the building, you can still order a copy of Pops, and we'll have it for you, and Craig will sign it. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.